Yesterday, Kylian Mbappe announced that he was dipping from PSG, something that pretty much everybody expected to happen by the end of the season. Mbappe has led France's biggest team for over half a decade, and even though they've been domestic champions over and over again, they've still failed to win the Champions League, and Mbappe decided he wanted to get the fuck up out of there. Their most recent loss was definitely the last of the last straws. Dortmund took on PSG in the UCL semifinal, and the story of the first leg was Jadon Sancho absolutely tormenting Nuno Mendes down that right wing. This was like Mike Tyson getting in the ring with an elderly man that has dementia, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's disease. Sancho completed 11 or 12 dribbles? It was the most by an English player in Champions League history. I swear Mendes probably had vertigo after the game. Sancho was spinning him like a ballerina. This was my favorite one. He looks dead at him and says, "Oh yeah, he's fool. Come here." Excuse me. In the second leg, Dortmund managed to shut PSG down and almost added another goal for reassurance to send France's best team packing. Other than Sancho's masterclass in the first leg, the story of this tie was Mbappe getting put in solitary confinement. He managed one single shot on target in the first leg, and even though he almost scored on that shot, his overall performance was questionable to say the least. Hummels was on his back like macaroni on cheese. He ain't let him take a single breath. This guy is 35, by the way, pushing 40, slamming a top-tier player in the world right now. That's crazy. Like always with modern football conversations, though, Mbappe's relatively pathetic performance led to a bunch of reactionary takes. Blah, 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 he's not all that. Blah, 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 he's too inconsistent to be called the best player in the world. Blah, 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 he ain't as good as everybody thinks. Obviously questionable takes, but probably the worst and most annoying one is the take about him being too inconsistent to be called the best player in the world. Because it's a trend I've been mentioning before on this channel, and it's irritating. Yeah, there's not a single legend in the history of the sport that was putting up elite performances every single week. Not one. The closest you'll ever get to that is Messi and Ronaldo, and even they had their weeks. Most of the players considered all-time greats had plenty of occasional weeks where they were off. I talked about it in the Van Dijk video, but I kind of brushed past it there, so let's actually get into it for real. The inconsistency argument is a form of nostalgia bias for two separate reasons. One, because of social media, and two, because of rearview mirror amnesia. Nowadays, when a superstar has a bad game, you have comps made within hours and it's plastered all over the internet. It makes a bunch of noise and the player is scrutinized by the entire football community nonstop. Narratives take hold, and that's all it takes before confirmation bias starts fueling agendas. All of that, along with the heavy glorification of older players and the quote-unquote good old days, gives off the false appearance that old players didn't really have bad games. Of course, it's not the fault of young people today that a lot of us are just basing all our opinions off the word of older people that watched legends play. Most people aren't going back and actually watching entire seasons of players play, like I said in the Van Dijk video. If you were to do that, though, you would find that not much was different in terms of consistency. Older players had poor games just as often as modern players, I promise you. Take Zidane, for example. Widely considered the best midfielder of all time, has won all kinds of trophies, a Ballon d'Or, yet he was, by the standards we're criticizing Mbappe by, a very inconsistent player. Obviously, I don't actually fully agree with that. It's true that Zidane didn't always show up, often taking games off, as some people will call it. It's the same criticism people would use for Pogba at United and Ozil at Arsenal. But if we're going to treat him the same way we're treating a current superstar, we would be saying he can't be the best player in the world because he was sometimes transparent here or there throughout league seasons, often showed up in big games, but so does Mbappe. Since when did you have to be elite every single week to be considered the best player in the world? If that's the case, there's only two players that could ever have been considered the best player in the world in history. In the sport of football, there's way too many factors to call a player inconsistent for occasional bad performances. There's some weeks where opposing managers scheme perfectly and it's hard to figure out the defense. There's some weeks where your teammates can't get you the ball because of a compact defensive shape and you're left starving as an attacker. Things happen. Off weeks are inevitable for everybody. Putting up a great performance every single week has never been the required standard for the best player in the world. The other angle that really bothered me was the take that Mbappe can't perform as a striker against good competition. For one thing, he isn't a striker. Judging him by his secondary position that he's forced to play is kinda stupid. We've seen him actually torch some of the best national teams on the globe from the left wing where he fully thrives. Argentina in 2022, Morocco in 2022. Shit, even from the right wing in 2018, he absolutely torched Argentina and Croatia. Saying Mbappe's overrated because he doesn't thrive in his secondary position is such a weird take. Even in the first leg when he played striker, he was very obviously way more threatening when he drifted off to the left and attacked from wide instead of standing in the box and strolling around waiting for something to come his way. Meanwhile, his questionable link-up play when he was central was put on display on a couple occasions. Pretending that a player is a fraud because he isn't performing to his best at a position in a system that doesn't fully utilize his best attributes like his speed and explosiveness is disingenuous. It makes a lot more sense to just say that he needs to improve his game as a striker, since that's most likely where he'll be forced to play if he joins Madrid, which is probably going to happen. If you put Haaland at winger, you don't expect him to go out there and snatch 3 dribbles a game against some of the best defenders in the world. Even early in the season when Vinny wasn't exactly playing left winger, he was struggling a little bit, and it was clear that he wasn't effective as when he played out wide. Mbappe having a poor performance out of position in a UCL semifinal in one of the most notorious away stadiums in the world doesn't automatically mean he's a fraud. I swear people just want to be the guy that sees through him so bad. Next leg, though, he did play left winger, and while he wasn't amazing, he was still a lot more threatening in general, and he was one of the main reasons PSG was overall more threatening in this leg. Of course, they still lost, mainly due to their strange ability to hit every part of the goal besides inside. Mbappe wasn't brilliant, but the point is that him being stuck at striker, which he openly hates playing, doesn't really help him much. Probably the most consistent argument against Mbappe is the fact that he's played in League One pretty much his entire career, and he's only good because he benefits from a relatively poor league. This would make sense if he didn't have a World Cup Golden Boot, a hat-trick in a World Cup final, 12 World Cup goals in 14 games, 48 Champions League goals in 73 games, 20 of which were in knockout games, and one of the most insane UCL goal catalogs for a young player ever. He scored against City home and away in the knockouts, Dortmund home and away in the knockouts, Prime Juventus away in the knockouts, United away in the knockouts, a hat-trick against Barcelona away in the knockouts, a brace against Bayern away in the knockouts, scored against Madrid home and away in the knockouts, and this year he had 5 goals in the first 2 rounds of the knockouts. Sure, context matters. Yes, he got his brace against Barca this year against 10 men. I don't see how that changes the point. The idea that Mbappe isn't that good because of an occasional stinker is laughable. Suggesting that a guy who scored in multiple World Cup finals and put up one of the most insane performances in the most recent one isn't a quote-unquote big game player is crazy. There's big games where he's disappeared, don't get me wrong. That UCL final against Bayern, he was outrageously ass. That doesn't mean he's a chronic choker or he can't perform when the lights are bright. There's plenty of games where he has. I don't know how, but we got to get rid of this notion that to be considered a top player in the world, you must always be excellent every game. Consistency is great, yes, don't get me wrong. But those legends everyone points to when they try to discredit Mbappe had their down games too. Right now, the only player in the world who I can say is the closest to perfectly consistent is Rodri. And besides Mbappe, I actually think he has the best argument for best player in the world right now, just based on the last few seasons, his impact, what he's won, and his reliability. Mbappe is definitely the more electric player, and he's for sure more dynamic. I'm not expecting Rodri to take over a game by spinning a full back, ducking past the center back, and slamming one in near post. It all depends on what you value more, though. You could easily argue that Rodri's ability to completely dictate a game from start to finish is more valuable than Mbappe's ability to pull a goal out of his ass or have random moments of brilliance that completely shift the tide of a game, whether his overall performance has been good or not. You could also argue that Mbappe's explosiveness, his skill with the ball at his feet, and his speed and creativeness are more valuable than what Rodri offers. That's why it's an opinion, because let's be real, neither of them are objectively more important. If you value a certain style or a game more, I can understand why you'd say Mbappe isn't the best player in the world. Me personally, I'd say he is. The idea that he's some massive fraud that's going to be found out when he plays in La Liga is hilarious. Right now, he has more goals than games played against Spanish teams with 12 and 11 matches. Mind you, most of these games were against some of the best teams Spain has to offer. I promise he's not getting boxed when he touches down and has to square up with fucking Espanyol. Let me know what you think. I don't know. Do y'all think Mbappe is the consensus best player in the world, or is he not? It's definitely the general popular opinion right now, and it honestly should be, in my personal opinion. I don't know. Thanks for watching, y'all.